a 5'6" man earning about $238,000 and a 6'5" man earning about $6,000 would be seen as roughly equivalent to one another in this online dating market. Hey everyone, I want to take some time to do a slightly different reaction than normal and react to Russ's song Handsomer. If you haven't heard the song, it's pretty catchy, and the remix version has been rising in the US charts. But just a few weeks ago, Russ also released a video starring Tiffany Haddish and Snoop Dogg. Just so everyone knows what song we're talking about, let's take a quick listen to a bit of the chorus here.
All right. I know I'm fine, but the money makes me handsomer. Walk around smelling like a come up in the answer for her problems, but I'm not him, I don't mind it though. You don't like me how you think you do, I like it though. I know I'm fine, but the money makes me handsomer. Walk around smelling like a come up in the answer for her problems, but I'm not him, I don't mind it though. You don't like me how you think you do, I like it though. I know I'm fine. I won't lie, that extra.
Okay, maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't, but as you can tell, it's a catchy song. That's the first thing that grabbed my attention about it. But what really caught my attention and made me want to do this reaction video was a line that comes later. Let's take a listen.
The possibility of paper got her trying to tell me I should date her. She just trying to play me. I just play it cool, then I play her. Baby hate the game, not the player. I'm 5'6", but the money make me 6'5". She said I love your songs, I told her to list 5. I'm 5'6", but the money make me 6'5". She said I love your songs, I told her to list 5. I know I'm.
So the line here is, I'm 5'6", but the money make me 6'5". Now, beyond this just being a clever line, there's actually some interesting research that tries to get directly at this trade-off between income and height when it comes to female assessment of male attractiveness. Specifically, a 2006 study used data from an online dating platform to try and get at what economists would call revealed preferences as they relate to how people behaved in online dating. Now, when you hear economists or other researchers talk about revealed preferences, this is a type of research that's important because oftentimes there are topics we may be interested in that are simply hard to get people to talk about truthfully through surveys or other methods. If you really want to dig deeper into revealed preferences theory, check out Samuelson's 1938 article to start with one of the seminal works in this field. But the general gist of revealed preferences theory is that how people actually behave tells us more about their preferences than what they might say their preferences are. Or, in other words, actions speak louder than words. If you tell an economist you want to save for retirement, but you don't, then that economist might say this reveals to us that even though you may have wanted to do that, you actually valued whatever it is you spent your money on more. To get more technical about this, a 2020 research article authored by Johanna Thoma said that at the core of revealed preference theory is a claim about the interpretation of preference in standard economic theory, both when it is applied in economic modeling, as well as, and especially, in empirical estimation and measurement. Revealed preference theorists are committed to a behavioral understanding of preference, whereby they equate preference with actual or hypothetical choice behavior. As I mentioned before, this is essentially just a fancy way of saying that actions speak louder than words, and looking at how people behave may give us a truer sense of their preferences than what they say those preferences are. I may tell you that I like salad more than ice cream, but if you had access to all my receipts for several months and saw that I was buying far more ice cream than salad, then you may infer from my behavior that I actually have a preference for ice cream over salad. Now, this type of revealed preference research can be particularly useful when the topic at hand is something that people may have a strong desire to conceal their true preferences. For instance, in some of my own research, my colleagues and I have used Google search activity to estimate levels of racial animosity within cities in the US. Since it is hard to get people to honestly answer a survey about how racist they are, it can be beneficial to look for behavior that might be thought to be racist, such as search activity that includes racial slurs, and then draw some inferences about general levels of racial attitudes within an area based on how prevalent that behavior is. But now we're a little off course, so to go back to the study I was talking about here from Hitch, the 2006 article that looks at this height-income trade-off, I do want to be clear here that I'm specifically citing an MIT Sloan working paper version of this study. I'll have a link to it that you can check out. This study did go on to get published in Quantitative Marketing and Economics in 2010. And in that version, the table I'm going to reference here was removed. Now, there are lots of reasons why a table could be removed. Sometimes content gets removed because there was some sort of flaw with the analysis or the inferences drawn from it. And other times, it may just be personal preference of a peer reviewer or editor, or even the author themselves, that some particular findings were not contributing to, or maybe even detracting from, the main point of the paper. As an author, you often have to pick your battles. Sometimes even when you think something's valuable, you just go with the flow because ultimately there's a lot of professional success in academia riding on getting publications in high-ranking journals. That's why we have memes like this one, which happens to be one of my favorite peer review memes. Authors often feel that they start out with a reasonably put together paper that they like. By the end of the process, it's a hodgepodge of various researchers' perspectives that they might feel ultimately take away from the paper. That's of course not to say that the peer review process isn't helpful. Sometimes it's very helpful. But my point here is just that I personally try not to infer too much from a table that authors initially included in the paper but got removed, since I don't know what factors led to that decision. I don't know what happened in this particular peer review process, but I just want to let you know this table did get cut from the final paper because I just want to be transparent, and that does cause at least some reason to be mildly skeptical about the findings reported. Now, for the table in question, as you can see here, this table is reporting the height-income trade-off to show indifference levels for men and women with respect to different combinations of a prospective partner's heights and incomes. For the male results, everything here is compared to a baseline man who's 5'11.5" with an income of $62,500. I'm operating from an assumption here that if A is equivalent to B and B is equivalent to C, then A is equivalent to C. I think that should be a very reasonable assumption, but these methods are admittedly a bit outside of what I'm normally using in my own papers. So again, just want to be transparent. And if we operate from that assumption and look at the findings here, we see that a 5'6" man would need an additional $175,000 of income relative to the baseline 5'11.5" man. And that would bring the 5'6" man's income up to $237,500. For a 6'5" man, a height that isn't actually reported, so we'll keep it simple. Just take the midpoint between the 6'4" and 6'6". So here between 51,000 and 63,000, and estimate that he would need about 57,000 less than the baseline 5'11.5" man, bringing his overall income down to $5,500. So if I'm interpreting this table correctly, a 5'6" man earning about $238,000 and a 6'5" man earning about $6,000 would be seen as roughly equivalent to one another in this online dating market. I have to admit, this does leave me scratching my head a bit. My suspicion here is that, at least in part, this is indicative of a possibility that some women are using this dating platform, not necessarily looking for a spouse. I find it highly doubtful that women would be truly as interested in a partner long-term, only earning $6,000 per year, as the results here might suggest. Alternatively, the presumption here might be that someone's current income is not the same as their long-term income. But in any case, we see about a $232,000 gap in annual income from the 5'6" man to the 6'5" man, which is quite a bit. I do find it somewhat interesting, though, that this result seems to be simultaneously indicating an excessively large premium for height, while also possibly not being quite as much of a flex as perhaps Russ anticipated when writing this line. I personally doubt Russ was intending a flex here that would suggest his annual income was less than that of a typical financial advisor with between 10 to 20 years of experience, as we found in some of our recent KITSIS research. That said, I do think it'd be interesting to use a more reasonable baseline for the 6'5" man's earnings. I suspect the height premium would only grow if the man in question were earning, say, $75,000 or $100,000 per year at that baseline. Now, I don't have access to the data. I'm only speculating, but I'm guessing that maybe for a comparison of a 5'6" man compared to a 6'5" man earning, say, $100,000, that 5'6" man might need to be earning $400,000, $500,000, or maybe even more to be seen as equivalent. And that might better match what Russ was going for here. And that's in part because of what economists refer to as diminishing marginal utility. Now, what diminishing marginal utility is saying is that each additional dollar of income is going to provide less benefit or utility to the household receiving it. In this case, if the 6'5" man is already earning $100,000 instead of $6,000, then all else being equal, we would expect that it's going to take a greater increase in income to still be indifferent between the taller man and the shorter man. And on this note, it has been very commonly reported in the media that happiness only increases as income grows to about $75,000 per year. This was what some early studies had found. However, subsequent studies have not supported this finding and have instead found that happiness does continue to increase with income, albeit with increasing at a diminishing rate as income grows. In other words, income does seem to be related to happiness, even above the $75,000 of income level, but you're going to see a larger jump in happiness going from $25,000 to $75,000 than you would going from $75,000 to $125,000. So back to the Russ video, there's this sort of plot embedded within the video where we see Tiffany Haddish's character first blow off Russ and then start pursuing him only once she finds out he has money. Russ doesn't seem to appreciate this, however, and ends up giving her a fake number, which leads to this exchange.
Hello?
Who this?
Who this? You called me.
Now, it's probably no surprise to anyone that women have a preference for taller men. So why make this reaction video? Well, two reasons. One, I just thought it was kind of interesting that this happened to align with some research I was aware of on this height income trade-off. And second, given that we are coming out of Short King Spring, whatever that was supposed to be, I think there are some important takeaways for this topic for below average height men. No, I'm not picking on short guys because, well, I am one myself. So I'm about 5'7". Now, I'm probably about the last person on earth you want to take online dating advice from because I met my wife in high school. But I was thinking, if a 22-year-old guy came to me and wondered what he should be focusing on, what would my advice be? And the first thing I think is really important on this topic is to avoid all the toxic culture that's out there around short men seeing themselves as victims. It's absolutely true. There's an element of unfairness to not winning the genetic lottery. That applies to height, facial symmetry, intelligence, and all sorts of other factors that have a strong genetic component. And this applies to both men and women. Men evaluate women based on strongly genetic characteristics that they also don't have any control over. But if you're worried about dating, it's particularly important to not get caught up in this because it does nothing to make you more attractive. In fact, complaining or getting overly self-conscious is only going to make you look less attractive. So don't do that. And unlike our height, our attitude is something we actually have some control over. When it comes to genetics, we were dealt the hand we were dealt, but choosing to see yourself as a victim is sort of like intentionally making your hand even worse. And there was a recent article that actually kind of caught my attention related to this, talking about guys who were opting for leg extension surgery to increase their height about 3 inches. Now, I'm a live and let live kind of guy. If a man wants to go and get a surgery, it'll make him happier, then I'm not going to try and stop him. And I know it's a BuzzFeed article, shame on me. But what struck me about reading some of the perspectives reported within this article was that I fit the exact profile of some of the men in the article. You know, I'm about 5'7", but I've had such a different experience that it was hard for me to kind of relate to what was expressed. So for instance, one man in the article says, at every single workplace I've been in, there have been several situations where people have commented on my height to discredit me entirely as a person. But what I find weird about this is that I've worked in many different settings, probably close to 10 different employers in various capacities now, ranging from fast food to high-end wealth management. And not once has anyone ever said anything about my height to entirely discredit me as a person. Now, I obviously don't know what this person went through. Maybe they had really bad luck through some weirdly height-biased employers who really were nasty. But I suspect more likely the explanation here might be that this individual was really self-conscious about their height and then was taking comments that may have been playful ribbing or just jesting as an attack. It's also possible that their self-consciousness around height actually drew them into discussions about height or led them to consciously or unconsciously shift a conversation to the topic of height. And if you're getting jabs from your friends or colleagues, particularly as a man, it's important to not misidentify playful comments because teasing each other actually happens to be one way that men tend to communicate with each other. Deborah Tannett, a professor of linguistics at Georgetown, has noted that boys and men tend to participate in ritual opposition more than girls and women. Now, this is not something we see only among males. We see this in all sorts of animals too. When guys rib each other, we tend to be trying to feel each other out. Let's say you're new to a job or new to some social circle, guys tend to use teasing to see how stable someone is. Do they overreact to the teasing? Can they take a joke? Can they dish it back? And ultimately, this can help guys figure out whether a new individual is someone that they're going to want to invite into their social circle or not. Usually, the best thing you can do in this situation is to appropriately dish it back. Now, you want to reciprocate at about the same level to demonstrate you can engage in this playful sparring. And over time, this sort of ribbing actually becomes somewhat endearing between men. Men aren't very likely to come out and tell each other they love each other, but they might engage in some playful sparring with each other that's essentially saying the same thing. Now, certainly some guys go over the line, some guys are just jerks, but that also becomes an opportunity for you to learn something about the environment you're in and at least get yourself out of that environment. But again, what really strikes me here is that if you're feeling like every environment you've encountered, you're experiencing this demeaning behavior that's meant to discredit you entirely as a person, it's likely you're actually misinterpreting what's going on. Again, to reflect on my own experience, I can't recall a single time where someone mentioned my height in a business context. Now, it probably actually has happened at some point. I've done things like go and play basketball with colleagues, and I'm almost certain something might have been said, but it's never something that I've been focused on or taken offense to, so I just can't recall any examples. But how we choose to respond to a comment about our height can really say a lot about mentally where we're at and how we are choosing to interpret the words of others. Now, getting back to the issue of how should a 22-year-old short man go about dating? I think it's worth thinking about what types of environments people are going to be less likely to evaluate you based on height. The filters built into online dating apps can be particularly harsh on short men because often the only option is just to exclude men below a certain height. Here's an interesting chart I saw recently shared by an economics professor, a friend of mine, that allegedly comes from some Bumble data. Now, I didn't get this data directly from the source. I saw it on social media, so just a caveat on that. But I'm largely not surprised by it. What this chart is showing is the percentage of women whose height preference settings on Bumble would include a man of a given height. So for instance, about 90% of women would include a man who is 6'6", whereas less than 10% of women would include a man who is 5'6". So a useful question to ask here is whether this is a great market for a short man to be spending time competing in. Personally, I don't think it is. The initial criteria that people are matching on is so superficial that you aren't setting yourself up for success. As weird as it might sound, for a short guy that actually wants to find a great long-term partner, I would probably de-emphasize dating for the first 5 years or so of your career. And I'd particularly stay away from online dating. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying not to date. What I'm saying is that I would focus on doing things in the real world where the primary purpose is not dating. If you happen to meet people out in the real world doing those things, then by all means, go for it. One thing I think is really underappreciated about organizations and communities that we may belong to is that they themselves are very powerful sorting mechanisms to find people with similar interests and values. Consider attending a particular church. If two people meet at a particular church, this tells us something about their faith at a high level, such as both being Christians, and possibly even at a further refined level, such as a shared denomination. It also probably tells us something about their geographical preferences, or at least some commonality of life circumstances that brought those two people to where they are today. It may also be an indication of shared moral values, music or food or socioeconomic status, and all sorts of other factors. There's a view out there, again, particularly among economist-type thinkers, that technology and online dating inherently lead to better matchmaking. The idea here is that search costs are a major friction in the dating market, meaning that it's difficult to try and find someone, and that results in a lot of inefficiency in going through that process. And therefore, that's particularly problematic for, say, smaller dating markets where it may be suboptimal, you're not getting a large enough pool, and therefore online dating can significantly improve this matchmaking. And while there certainly are cases where that might be true, it really overlooks a natural occurring matchmaking that we see through communities, organizations, friend groups, and these other just groups that we may self-select into. I remember seeing an interesting tweet summarizing some findings from a study from Rosenfield and Thomas that was published in 2012 in the American Sociological Review. In that study, the authors found that one-year breakup rates were significantly higher among those who met online compared to more traditional places to meet a partner. Specifically, the rate was nearly 16% among those who met online versus only 10% among those who met through friends, 5% among those who met in primary or secondary school, and only 1% among those who met through church. Now, we do have to be careful drawing inferences from this because it's almost certainly the case that the types of people who tend to meet in church are very different than the types of people who tend to meet online. So it might not be that meeting in church per se is what's leading to lower breakup rates. But I still think this provides some interesting food for thought with respect to the typical perspective that meeting online is so much better because you find people better matched to you. It may, in fact, be the case that leveraging the sorting that occurs naturally through friend groups, communities, and organizations is equally or better suited for matching people. And getting back to the specific issue here of dating as a short man, the great thing about real-world networks is that you're not going to be arbitrarily filtered out. You get a chance to be yourself and make an impression on someone who might otherwise have just filtered you out of their preferences on all online dating platforms. And this is also where it's really important to find things that you're passionate about and can really pour yourself into. But you do truly have to be passionate about it. If you come off as unauthentic or just going somewhere to try and meet people, you're going to struggle to connect with people genuinely in the first place. Additionally, to get the benefits talked about before from kind of that natural sorting of people into groups and communities, you need to naturally fit within that community in the first place. It sort of reminds me of the episode from Always Sunny in Philadelphia when Mac and Dennis go to opposite sides of an abortion protest trying to meet women.
Planned Parenthood, Bryn Mawr Medical Center.
Well, I'm gonna go. At least one pro-choice voice is gonna be heard.
One? There was like tons of those chicks at the last one.
Which side had more?
Eventually, it becomes obvious that neither truly fits.
This is crazy.
Yeah, weird. People actually care about women's bodies. You believe that?
Yeah, I think Mac picked the wrong side. Just like no dudes here.
Gross.
Hi.
Hi.
I like your look.
Excuse me?
I like the whole hippie thing. Really works for you.
Get lost, breeder.
I love the smell of protest in the morning.
What?
I was calling that movie, you know, Apocalypse Now, Napalm in the morning.
Is that the new Mel Gibson movie?
No.
Did you see Passion of the Christ? I saw it 12 times.
Okay.
And Dennis even decides mid-protest that he's going to try his luck on the other side after being rejected by multiple women on the pro-choice side, ultimately ending with him getting pelted with eggs from people on both sides of the protest. But on a more serious note, when you truly care about something and you commit yourself to it, people around you are going to see that. Couple that with just generally doing what you can to be a good person, taking care of yourself, and really getting your proverbial house in order. And whether it's meeting someone directly or getting introduced to people through friends or colleagues, genuinely getting involved in things you believe in, communities that you are part of, even when you aren't actively viewing it as dating, can be a great way for short men in particular to meet like-minded people without facing some of the same bias that's going to be built into dating platforms. Now to go back to Russ's line, I'm 5'6", but the money make me 6'5". The study we looked at earlier, estimating that a 5'6" man earning about $238,000 and a 6'5" man earning about $6,000 would be seen as roughly equivalent to one another. Another reason a short man might consider deprioritizing dating for a few years is the financial improvement that's often made in the first years of one's career. I think it can make sense to spend some time really focused on getting a strong start in your career. I've done some work specifically on earnings curves throughout the life cycle. For many Americans, the first decade or so of work is a time that sees really strong earnings growth. For instance, based on some historical data from the Social Security Administration, see the paper here for a direct data source. For those earning at about the 90th percentile over their lifetimes, over the first 9 years or so of their career, they nearly saw their incomes double. And while the increases aren't as extreme at lower lifetime earnings levels, we still see significant growth. In fact, generally the highest rate of growth in earnings occurs within the first decade of one's career. I want to be very clear here that I'm not suggesting someone should be a workaholic, obsessed with their career. That can cause actually a long-term lack of imbalance that's very unhealthy. But there's some real benefit to sustained focus during this first part of your career and getting yourself on a great trajectory. In many fields, you may have better options to downshift 5 to 10 years down the road if it's time to start a family or take on commitments that pull you more away from work. But let's say you get 5 years down the road, you've had no success in dating in real life. At that point, if you want to go explore online dating, at least if you've been really committed to bettering yourself, you're likely going to be in a more favorable position. Hopefully you've taken care of yourself through that time and maybe even improved your health a bit as you've gotten away from some of the bad habits that people can experience in early adulthood. Along with that, hopefully your income has also improved as well. I suspect you'll find that a 27-year-old earning $120,000 will do far better than a 22-year-old earning $60,000 on an online dating platform. One of my favorite economists was recently discussing some related topics around dating apps and social media. And from what I understand of that discussion, it sounds like, unfortunately, most dating apps don't allow people to specifically express this type of indifference that we've talked about previously. So you can't set an indifference preference between income and height. You get rigid cutoff points rather than the type of flexibility that people tend to actually exhibit in real life, being open to a partner when they may not meet an idealized standard on one dimension, when they otherwise have strong traits elsewhere that more than compensate for the deficiency. And beyond this, I would just generally encourage you to get your financial house in order. Now, let's be real. No one is going to want to date you just because you know how to get the most out of your Roth 401k. But by being the type of person that gets their financial house in order, gets themselves out of debt, gets proper life insurance, gets an estate plan in place, that is something that will cast you in an even more positive light once you've gotten to know somebody to the point that this sort of information is appropriately being shared. There are various frameworks out there that you can follow depending on what speaks to you. There's Dave Ramsey's Baby Steps, Money Guy's Financial Order of Operations. I recently released my Financial ABCs to provide a step-by-step process for building wealth. If you're interested, those steps are: A, save up a starter emergency fund of 5% of your annual income. B, get term life insurance and estate documents in place. C, get rid of all debt except the mortgage. D, build up a fully funded emergency fund of 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. E, save 15% for retirement. F, save up to 10% for child's college education expenses, if desired. G, pay off your mortgage. And H, save at least 25% for retirement. Now, if you're familiar, you'll notice there are a lot of similarities between my Financial ABCs and Dave Ramsey's Baby Steps. My own checklist is certainly heavily influenced by his, with just a few minor tweaks to try and provide some additional guidance where I see some people struggling the most. But the point here isn't choosing one method or another. The point is that developing good financial behaviors does help improve the attractiveness of men on the dating market. A 2018 study in evolution and human behavior found that women's ratings of male attractiveness were 1,000 times more sensitive to salary information than men's. And from a theoretical perspective, parental investment theory, the evolutionary theory that posits that the sex within a species that invests more in the development of offspring will both be more selective in choosing a mate and place greater weight on the ability of their mate to procure resources, is broadly consistent with these ideas as well. If you're looking for help with investing or insurance or any other financial questions, feel free to reach out using the link below or drop a comment in the chat and I may feature it in a future video. Again, a little different video than normal, but let me know what you think. Thanks for listening, everyone.